price, the gold price being the reciprocal of the value of the dollar, is the whole key there. And we think that exposing this scheme is really the first step toward a more just world.
But, Chris, let me just ask you, as Bill said, so many people have suffered. Hundreds of thousands of people or more have died because of this lack of a freely traded gold price, if, in fact, they did engage in this. And if they did engage in this and cause this human suffering and death, are they guilty of crimes against humanity, in your opinion?
Well, in a moral sense, that certainly could be argued. We have made this case for many years, but they're not alone in this. I mean, I'm still mystified, for example, by the stance of the South African Reserve Bank. The South African Reserve Bank is very much part of the gold price suppression scheme. I just don't understand why this is not treason against its own country. The Mexican central bank, even the Russian central bank, really to be silent is to be complicit in all this.
Well, and Chris is so right. And I was down there and I met with the South African Reserve Bank when I made this presentation in 2001. There are two of their second, third people there. They were snickering behind my back. I caught them. And the problem is this guy, James Cross, is head of the Reserve Bank, who's got his wife, Jessica Cross, has been a spokesperson for the gold cartel crowd for the last decade. And it's, as Chris said, I mean, this guy, if there's one person that should be put up for treasonous charges, it's James Cross, the head of the South African Reserve Bank. And I hope he gets this message.
Bill, let me ask you a question here because, and you gentlemen haven't had a chance to listen to this yet, but I was fortunate enough to interview Jim Sinclair yesterday, and we did a pre-release on him today. But he was talking about the commitment of traders, the current commitment of traders, and it is, as you guys well know, it's all-time record short position by the commercials. But he said that they lost against de Gaulle, and Jim also stated that they lost late when they went up against, besides the rigging of the COMEX, they were in the process of losing, right, when gold was skyrocketing in late 79, 80. So I guess my question to you is, Jim's point is that they're up against China and that they will lose and that they will be overrun, and they haven't recognized that they're up against a country just yet. But when they are up against a country and not just paper trading sheep that they can wipe out from time to time, or all the time, I should say, that they lose against a country. Have you been advising China, or has there been a discussion with China, and are they up against China so they'll lose in this case?
I can't speak for China, but I can say that while the U.S. press doesn't even want to know what we have to say, that we've had length stuff with the Russian government central bank, their key economic advisors, and specific to China, the Chinese Investment Corporation, their sovereign wealth fund. I've been a part of 3 conference calls with them for the last year and a half. And I think they're paying attention based on a lot of the stuff that's coming out of China, what God has had to say. Now, it's an exciting time for us. At the same time, it's frustrating because we're not allowed to be heard in the United States, yet Russia and China want to know what we have to say. And Jim Sinclair is so right. If you talk about the commitment of traders for your listeners, that's what they call these commercial shorts are against the spec longs, and usually they win and they take the price down, and they wipe out the specs, and the price goes back up again in this particular market. Would somebody talk about who are these commercial shorts? We do, but no one else does. And Jim Sinclair is dead right. China is in the market at the same time India is in the market, and the bad guys are going to get wiped out, if I'm correct.
What Sinclair means is that people who have access to virtually infinite money, which really is the bullion banks when they're backed by the U.S. government, they can run and rig any market on any particular day. Sinclair means that those people with infinite money have run into somebody else with infinite money. That is a national counterparty here to their trades. And, China, of course, has got almost as much money as the United States does now. So this is an enormous political issue, much more than a market issue. The gold issue is going to be decided by international politics, not by the COMEX traders in New York.
Chris is right on.
Would you say, though, gentlemen, that the Chinese, because there seems to be some kind of a back and forth, right, or behind the scenes almost economic, I don't want to say war developing, but that would be the first stages of a real conflict. But are the Chinese now openly against these bullion banks in the United States and maybe using that as a tool to put pressure on them through the use of taking delivery of large amounts of physical gold? Or is that some type of an economic weapon that the Chinese can use?
Well, it's a weapon they can use, Eric, but I think they're being fairly circumspect about it. Last year, I was at a dinner of the Committee for Monetary Research and Education in New York, and I happened to sit next to Robert Mundell, the Columbia professor who is credited as the inventor of the euro, he is an advisor to the Chinese government, and he got up and remarked that he thought China would be very responsible in its operation in the world financial markets, but that he had advised the Chinese government to purchase any and all gold that might be sold by the International Monetary Fund. Mundell thought that China would not want to disrupt the market, but it would want to hedge its foreign exchange reserves as best as it could without crashing the value of its other investments. And I'm sure that that's what's happening. China is walking a tightrope. It has all these dollars. It wants their value to be reasonably maintained, but it knows that the long-term trend of a currency issued to infinity is going to be down. So China wants to hedge itself. It's hedging itself by purchasing gold, but it has acknowledged in public that it can't buy all the gold at once without exploding that market and crashing the dollar market. So I expect that the world powers are trying to arrange a very gentle devaluation of the dollar that will be completed when those other countries have hedged themselves against dollar devaluation as best they can.
Eric, I think Chris is just exactly right on. In my conversation with the Chinese, every single time it was expressed to me, they don't want to rock the boat. And it's the same in all their public announcements. But this is what blows me away. Rock the boat. Why should buying gold rock anything? Just do what you want to do. That's what a big deal the suppression of the gold price is to the U.S. government and the Chinese, and the rest of the world knows it. It's that big a deal, this little tiny market, this barometer. And when this blows, it's going to be the story of, a little dramatic here, but it's going to dwarf Madoff, Enron, everything. That's why this our request for the Freedom of Information Act about what's the status of U.S. gold is such a big deal. And they say, well, we don't tell this to the public. Huh?
Yeah, that's the real point here, Eric, is these decisions are the most cosmic that will be made on planet Earth. They will determine the value of all capital and all labor. Everyone on the planet will be subject to these decisions. And here they are being deliberated and made in complete secrecy. That, to me, is a crime against humanity in itself.
And you have, with Congressman Ron Paul's got all the support to audit the Fed. I mean, make my day, for crying out loud. But they're going to push, go to heaven and earth to make sure they don't get audited so the truth can't be known. And it's unbelievable, but there's actually a chance it could happen because Barney Frank's even behind this thing, and we'll see if it gets through the Senate or whatever. But, oh, my gosh, it can change the entire United States, and people have no idea what a big deal this is.
Another problem, Eric, is that, this means that the destiny of our country, the United States, is now beyond our control. The fate of the United States, because of our irresponsibility, our financial irresponsibility, and the unaccountability of the Federal Reserve, is now going to be decided by our creditors, our foreign creditors. Our influence in the world is going to collapse. These people have ruined our country, or placed our country in great jeopardy of ruination. And they acknowledge this, I think, by their insistence on secrecy. This is the crime, that people who've never been elected to office and never had to explain themselves to the public are going to determine the value of everybody's capital and labor and property and everything else. That's an offense.
Our forefathers, Chris, also warned us not to become involved with the Europeans or allow the Europeans to have influence inside our republic. And the creation of the Federal Reserve had European tentacles, and it's privately owned. It's not part of the government. That's just a travesty that's in existence in this country, is it not?
Well, I am not one who thinks that the technical shareholding of the banks and the Federal Reserve means much. I mean, the people of the United States, through their elected representatives, could take charge of the Federal Reserve anytime they want. And in fact, what's happening with Representative Paul's bill and the absolute hysteria of reaction from the Fed show that this is true. But I will agree with you that there is a banker interest, a financial community interest in protecting central bank control of the world. I don't attribute this to any, ethnic group or particular country or anything like that, but this is the old struggle, the historic struggle that began at the beginning of financial man between the financial interests and the producing interests. And the financial interests have always had the upper hand. Now, perhaps with an audit of the Federal Reserve, we can put a little more power in the hands of the people and the producing interests. But the battle is joined.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us and for putting out such big news to the gold community.
Well, thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for joining us at KingWorldNews.com. Remember to tune in next week where we will have Jim Rogers and Luis Yamada. Also, remember to go to our Gold Plus page for exclusive weekly interviews with Ted Butler and GATA, and where we will continue the 4-part Systemic Failure series with Jim Willey from the Hat Trick Letter.